A heart once soft can quickly turn into a blade of cold, hard iron when pushed to the breaking point. Witness the sharp edge of revenge as it cuts through the lies and settles the final score. Click subscribe now to see the ultimate price of a broken promise.
My brother-in-law walked me down the aisle. Not my father. Not my uncle. My brother-in-law, Marcus, a man I'd known for 4 years, who still sometimes called me by my sister's name by accident, who had to ask my husband twice which side of the church was the bride's side. He was the one who offered his arm at the back of that little venue in Columbus, looked at me with those kind, slightly panicked eyes and said, "You ready?" And I said yes, because what else was I going to say? My parents were in Scottsdale that weekend. My little brother had just closed on a new house out there. They'd already bought the flights 2 months before my wedding date was even finalized. I need to back up. My name is Dara. I'm 32 years old. I work in healthcare administration, which sounds more glamorous than it is. Mostly I stare at spreadsheets and fight with insurance companies over reimbursement codes. I grew up in a suburb of Cincinnati, the older of 2 kids. And for most of my childhood, I thought that being older meant being the responsible one. I thought that was just the deal. You're first, so you set the example. You're first, so you figure things out. You're first, so you don't complain. My brother's name is Cole. He's 4 years younger than me, which matters later. Cole is the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately becomes the center of it. Not because he's loud or showy. It's quieter than that. He has this easy, magnetic thing about him. And my parents just orbited him from the time he was small. I used to think it was because he was the baby. Now I think it was just who they decided to love more, and they dressed that decision up in excuses for 30 years. One daughter is a doctor. Well, I asked my mom if I could get a part-time job at the coffee shop in town. She said yes and then added, almost as an afterthought, "You should start saving for college." I did. I worked 12 hours a week through junior and senior year, put almost all of it in a savings account, applied for every scholarship I could find, and took out loans for the rest. My parents contributed nothing. I never asked them to. I didn't realize I could. Cole went to Ohio State 4 years later. My parents paid for all of it. Not loans. Not a payment plan. They wrote the check for his tuition and his housing and his meal plan. And when he needed a car his sophomore year, my dad drove him to the dealership. I found out about the car by accident. I was home for Christmas and saw the insurance paperwork on the kitchen counter. I remember standing there holding it, doing the math, realizing that the amount my parents had spent on Cole's first 2 years of college was more than my total student debt. I set the paperwork down and didn't say anything. I went back to my apartment in January and signed up for an extra shift. That was my pattern for a long time. See the thing, set it down, go back to work. I kept that pattern even after I graduated, even after I got my first real job, even after my parents started calling me monthly to say they were a little tight this month and asking if I could help. I sent them $300 a month for 2 years. I told myself it was because I loved them. Mostly, I think I was still trying to earn something I'd never been offered. Cole never sent them anything. I know because I asked, once. Casually, like it was just curiosity. My mom said, "Cole has a lot of expenses right now." He was 27. He lived in a 3-bedroom house with a finished basement and a kitchen he'd renovated himself. He had expenses. I was paying off student loans and sending my parents grocery money. I met my husband Joel at a work conference in 2021. He was the kind of person I didn't think existed for me. Steady, thoughtful, genuinely funny in a way that didn't require an audience. We dated for a year and a half before he proposed. I said yes in the parking lot of a Trader Joe's on a Tuesday night, and I meant it more than I've meant almost anything. We set the date. July. Columbus, because that's where we lived and where our friends were. Small venue, maybe 80 people. Outdoor ceremony, if the weather held. I told my parents in February. They said they were happy for me. My mom cried a little on the phone. My dad said, July's a good month. I sent them the formal invitation in April, with the hotel information and the weekend itinerary, the way you do when you're trying to make it easy for people to show up. They confirmed they were coming. My mom texted me a heart emoji. In May, Cole put an offer in on a house in Scottsdale. It was accepted. His housewarming party. I'm not going to call it a party. He called it a gathering. Which is somehow worse. Was planned for the last weekend in June. 1 week before my wedding, my parents booked flights to Scottsdale in late April. Before my wedding invitation had even been in their hands for 3 weeks. I didn't know any of this until my mom called me 6 weeks before the wedding and told me they wouldn't be able to make it. She said it in this careful, prepared way, like she'd rehearsed it. She said the flights were already paid for and non-refundable, and that Scottsdale was so far, and that the drive from Scottsdale to Columbus would be over 20 hours. And what could they do? I said, you could fly. She said flights were so expensive last minute. I looked it up after we hung up. There were round-trip flights from Phoenix to Columbus for under $200 that weekend. I know because I sat there for 20 minutes refreshing the page, waiting to be wrong. I called my dad. He didn't answer. He texted me back 2 hours later. Mom explained the situation. We're really sorry, sweetheart. We'll celebrate with you when you're back. That was it. That was the conversation. My maid of honor. A woman named Bex, who has known me since we were 11 and has never once failed to say the exact right thing, sat with me on my apartment floor that night while I cried in a way I hadn't cried in years. The ugly, shaking kind, that's less about sadness and more about finally letting something out that you've been carrying too long. She didn't try to fix it. She just handed me a dish towel when I ran out of tissues and said, "This is not okay. What they're doing is not okay." I needed to hear that. I needed someone to say it out loud. The wedding was beautiful. I mean that genuinely. It was a warm evening. The light was gold. Joel cried when I walked in. And Marcus did a surprisingly decent job walking me down the aisle, even though he held my arm a little too tight the entire way, like he was afraid I might bolt. My mother-in-law gave a toast that made half the room cry. My best friends were there. The people who had actually shown up for me, over and over, across years, they were all in that room. There were 2 empty chairs in the front row. We'd saved them on purpose. I told the venue coordinator to leave them. I'm not sure why exactly. Maybe I still thought something might change. Maybe I just needed everyone in that room to see what I had always known. After the ceremony, during cocktail hour, I got a text from my mom. A photo of Cole's new backyard. Little string lights over a patio, everyone holding drinks, my parents in the center of it, smiling. She wrote, "So proud of your brother. Miss you. Hope it's a beautiful day." I showed it to Bex. She took my phone, put it in her clutch, and said, "You're not looking at that again tonight." She was right. I didn't. Joel and I went to Vermont for our honeymoon. 12 days, a rented cabin, no social media. It was the first time in years I'd gone more than a few days without feeling vaguely guilty about something. I slept 9 hours a night. I ate breakfast slowly. I didn't check my email. When we got back, there was a voicemail from my mom. She said they'd had such a nice time in Scottsdale, and she hoped the wedding was lovely, and she couldn't wait to hear all about it. She didn't say she was sorry. She said, "I hope it was lovely," the way you'd say it about a work event you'd had a scheduling conflict with, like it was just one of those things. I listened to it twice. Then I sat down and started doing some math. $300 a month, 2 years. That was $7,200 I'd given my parents. Money I'd earned. Money I'd given because I believed family meant something, because I thought it would matter, because I thought someday they'd see me the way they saw Cole, and I'd understand why I'd been so patient. I called my dad and told him I was stopping the monthly payments. I said it calmly, without drama, the way you'd cancel a subscription. I told him I needed to focus on my own finances going forward. He said that was selfish. I said that was interesting. And I hung up. Then a week later, something happened that I still haven't fully processed. My grandmother, my dad's mother, had passed away 2 years earlier. I'd been close to her in a way I wasn't close to most of my family. She used to call me every Sunday. She'd lived alone in a small house in Dayton for the last decade of her life, and she'd taught me to play gin rummy, and she'd told me, more than once, that she worried I worked too hard. I miss her the way you miss someone who actually saw you. What I did not know, what no one had told me, was that she'd left me money. Not a little money. A significant amount, held in an account my dad had been named co-trustee on when she passed, pending my 30th birthday or marriage, whichever came first. She'd structured it that way specifically. She'd told her attorney that she wanted me to have stability before I had access, so I wouldn't feel pressure to use it before I was ready. I turned 31 in March. I got married in July. I found out about the account from my grandmother's attorney, who had apparently been trying to reach my father for months to complete the transfer. And who, after receiving no response, finally found my contact information through the estate records and called me directly. I remember sitting very still on my couch while he explained the situation. He was apologetic and professional, and careful with his language, and none of the careful language changed what he was saying. My father had known about this account, had known about it for over a year, had not told me. I asked the attorney if there was any reason, any legal or procedural reason, why my father might not have mentioned it. There was a pause. He said no. I hung up. I sat there for a long time, and then I called Joel into the room and told him everything. He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do exactly what she intended." The process took a few weeks. There was paperwork, there was a notarized form, there was a meeting with the attorney that I attended alone because I didn't want my father in that room. He tried to call me 4 times in the 10 days it took to complete the transfer. I let it go to voicemail each time. The messages were strange. He started out measured, then got increasingly urgent. Then, in the last one, he just said my name twice and hung up. The money came through on a Thursday. The first thing I did was pay off my student loans, all of them. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and my husband's hand on my shoulder. And I made the payment and watched the balance go to zero. And I thought about the 16-year-old version of me, working weekends at a coffee shop and carefully counting what she'd saved. And I let myself cry for her. Then Joel and I paid off the rest of our car. We put a down payment on a small house. Nothing dramatic. A 3-bedroom in a neighborhood we'd been watching for 2 years, with a yard and good light in the kitchen. We set up an emergency fund. And then I did one more thing. My grandmother had been the first person in my family to go to college. She'd told me that once, matter-of-factly, like it was just a piece of history and not a thing that had shaped everything. She'd worked as a secretary for 30 years and raised 3 kids and quietly, steadily built a life with almost no help from anyone. I set up a small scholarship through the community college in Dayton. Not large, just enough to cover books and fees for 1 student per year, priority given to first-generation students who were also working during their studies. I named it after her. I used her middle name because that's what she liked. My dad found out about the transfer when he received the paperwork showing the account had been released. He called me. I answered this time. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said he'd been planning to tell me. He just wanted to make sure everything was in order first. He'd just been waiting for the right moment. I let him finish. Then I said, "You waited through my birthday. You waited through my wedding. You waited until someone else called me." He didn't say anything. I told him that I wasn't angry, and that surprised me, because I'd expected to be. I said that I hoped he and my mom were doing okay. I said I thought it would be good for us to take some space from each other for a while. He said, "Space? What does that mean?" I said it meant I needed some room to figure out what I wanted our relationship to look like going forward. I said it without cruelty. I meant it without cruelty. But I meant it without cruelty. But I meant it completely. The last thing he said before we hung up was that he didn't understand why I was being like this. He said the family was going to fall apart. I thought about the 2 empty chairs in the front row of my wedding. I thought about the photo of Cole's patio with the string lights. I thought about $7,200 and 30 years of being the one who figured things out. I said, "I think it already did, Dad. I just finally noticed." I want to say something before I finish. I know there's a version of this story where I'm the villain. When I'm the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her parents over hurt feelings. I know some people will hear this and think I overreacted, or that I was too cold, or that family is supposed to mean unconditional. I have thought about all of those things. I have held all of those versions up to the light and turned them around and looked at them from every angle. Here's what I keep coming back to. I spent 30 years making myself smaller, so there would be enough room for everyone else. I sent money I didn't have. I swallowed questions that deserved answers. I set down the paperwork and went back to work. I saved 2 chairs at my wedding for people who didn't show up. And I held on to those chairs even after I knew, because part of me was still hoping I was wrong about them. My grandmother saw me. She didn't just see the responsible daughter, the reliable one. The one you don't worry about because she figures things out. She saw that I was working hard at something lonely, and she wanted to give me a foundation. I'm using it. I'm building something real on top of it. Joel and I have a house with good light in the kitchen, and a yard where we planted tomatoes this spring, and a spare room we haven't decided what to do with yet. I reach out to my parents a few times a year now. The conversations are short and careful, and they're probably as painful for them as they are for me. Cole doesn't call. That's okay. I'm not waiting for anything from any of them anymore. That's the thing no one tells you about finally stopping. It doesn't feel like winning. It doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like setting down something very heavy you've been carrying so long you stop noticing the weight. And then it feels like being able to breathe. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what made my dad do it, not the hiding. The continued hiding. Month after month, the account sitting there with my name tied to it, and him saying nothing. I don't think it was malice exactly. I think it was something quieter and more corrosive than malice. I think he'd spent so long deciding that Cole was the one who needed protecting, the one who needed resources and attention and softness, that it just became automatic. I became automatic too, the one who was fine, the one who figured things out, the one who didn't have to worry about. The thing about being the one people don't worry about is that nobody checks on you either. There's a version of me that would have found out about that account and said nothing. Who would have waited, politely, for my father to bring it up? Who would have set it down, like the insurance paperwork, like the phone calls I didn't make, like the apologies I never received? Just set it down and gone back to work. I know that version of me very well. I was her for a long time. But something shifted when Marcus walked me down that aisle, not in a dramatic way. Just quietly, in the back of my chest. This small, clear recognition that I had been holding everyone else's comfort for 30 years at the expense of my own. And that I was tired. Not angry. Just genuinely, deeply tired of it. What I've come to believe is that the choices we make over time, Every small decision to look away, to send the money, to swallow the question, they compound. They build a kind of architecture around you, and eventually you're living inside something you built without realizing you were building it. My parents built that architecture too. Every time they chose coal, they were also choosing who I would have to become to survive their choosing. Responsible, self-sufficient, quiet. They made me capable of handling everything, and then they were surprised when I handled this. My grandmother understood something they didn't. She knew that strength without foundation is just endurance. She wanted me to have something solid under my feet. Not because she felt sorry for me, but because she saw what I was capable of if I wasn't spending all my energy just staying upright. That scholarship I named after her isn't charity. It's a continuation. It's her saying, through me, to some kid working a double shift and studying for finals, you don't have to do this alone. Someone sees you. I think about Dara, the younger version of me, counting her savings in a coffee shop parking lot. I want to tell her that the discipline she's building is real, that the clarity she's developing is real, that the part of her that keeps going even when no one is watching is the most valuable thing she has. Not because it'll be rewarded. Sometimes it won't be. But because integrity compounds too. The choices you make when no one is looking become who you are when everyone is. My dad asked me why I was being like this. I've thought about that question a lot. The honest answer is, I'm not being like anything. I'm just finally being like myself.